They don't wait for you to fail, they wait for you to show confidence, then they strike. In English football, the pattern never changes. A young talent excites the nation, performs under pressure, carries the team when it matters, and the moment he stands tall or shows belief, the spotlight shifts from his football to his attitude. Jude Bellingham built his reputation abroad, away from the noise. His game spoke for him, but as his influence grew, the conversation stopped being about what he did on the pitch and started being about how he reacted off it. After England's recent win, the headlines ignored his contribution and zoomed in on his expression when subbed, his posture during a celebration. Suddenly, passion became ego. Conviction sounded like arrogance. Not one critic talked about his impact in big moments, only how he carried himself while delivering them. Perform brilliantly, stay quiet, stay safe, show presence, become the target. That's the cycle, and Jude is right in the middle of it. When the English media turns its attention to a player, they seldom dissect the tactics or what actually happened on the pitch. Instead, they reach for charged language that tests public opinion. In Bellingham's case, words like unsettling and disruptive began circulating, despite no real football logic behind them. These terms don't analyze play, they question personality. That's deliberate. Rather than evaluating contribution, the discussion switched to how he reacted physically during and after incidents. The arm raise after a goal should have been seen as ambition under pressure, yet was twisted into arrogance. When a player performs well, there's no angle to attack the football, so attention moves to expression. It's critique built on optics, not evidence. The belief that leaders must show composure without visible edge is outdated. The greatest competitors have always demonstrated intensity, yet here, the same traits are treated as flaws. For Bellingham, the narrative has followed a familiar trajectory. Early praise, rising admiration, spotlight exposure, confidence recast as ego, and blame prepared ahead of any future setback. None of it targets decision-making, only personality. The goal isn't tactical improvement, it's public positioning. This isn't a new phenomenon. Time has shown that when England's national team struggle, responsibility is usually directed toward the players with the strongest personalities or the highest expectations. The game's collective shortcomings are often narrowed down to a single individual, even when they were the reason the team remained competitive. There have been countless instances across major tournaments where a standout player carried the team through difficult stretches, only to become the central talking point for reasons unrelated to performance. Jude Bellingham's situation mirrors that pattern. England have relied on him in pivotal matches. His involvement has repeatedly prevented early eliminations. Yet, current media discussions overtook his influence during critical phases. You can go back through different eras and see similar treatments. Young stars have historically been lifted into hero status before being harshly evaluated after the slightest dip. Wayne Rooney faced it following a dismissal. David Beckham endured it after an isolated moment of emotional reaction. More recently, younger talents received severe backlash, not for their technical contribution, but due to public discourse surrounding mistakes that was shared across the squad. In each case, narrative overshadowed evidence. Those players often performed well statistically, but single moments defined perception long after tournament conclusion. What's consistent is that the media's focus shifts from assessing decisions made in match phases to invoking themes like attitude, character, or discipline. These are easier to sensationalize and harder to refute since they are subjective. Bellingham is now positioned at the beginning of that arc. What's remarkable is that he's being criticized before any major failure. The timing suggests the perception is being shaped ahead of competition. It prepares the public to accept the idea that should England not reach expected levels, the issue wasn't tactical or managerial, but individual temperament. Those patterns raise questions about selective judgment. Some players with lower intensity receive lighter critique despite underperforming repeatedly. Others, due to confidence or visibility, fall under increased evaluation, even when producing positive outcomes. That discrepancy reinforces the belief that media attention isn't assigned based on contribution, but on the ease with which personality can be used as conversation fuel. In environments where pressure is constant, elite players often develop assertive habits. These include demanding standards from teammates, feeling frustration when substituted, or showing visible determination in key moments. Within successful squads, these behaviors are generally embraced as signs of accountability. However, when such traits are examined externally through the lens of selective criticism, they're frequently reinterpreted as ego or volatility. Jude Bellingham's reaction after being withdrawn from the recent match was met with extreme commentary, despite the fact that similar gestures from other influential figures in football are often seen as indicators of competitive instinct. When a player believes he can change the outcome, stepping off the pitch reluctantly is logical. That doesn't imply disrespect, it communicates willingness to remain responsible for the result. Yet, media framing converted that drive into an attitude problem. This is where managerial communication becomes critical. A coach's interpretation of a player's intent can shift public opinion. When leadership acknowledges passion as commitment, it lowers the tension. When responses appear distant or dismissive, mistrust escalates. In Bellingham's case, commentary from technical staff didn't fully counter the public narrative. Instead of intentionally shutting down speculative claims, occasional remarks left space for doubt. That space was exploited. Elite managers protect emerging figures by reframing intensity as ambition, but when statements fail to do so, the discourse evolves without guidance. In competitive squads, quiet tolerance within the dressing room, it doesn't always translate into strong external positioning. If leaders remain silent while public character assessments grow louder, the athlete is left to absorb scrutiny unsupported. The difference in how behavior is received also depends on context. In Spain, Bellingham has been recognized for versatility and resilience. He's been used in multiple roles, worked through injury, and adapted to team needs. Traits applauded there, they're currently being questioned by some English commentators. The contrast suggests that criticism isn't truly about those behaviors, but about the environment in which they're interpreted. Intensity only becomes a liability when people choose not to understand what fuels it. If commitment is treated as emotional inadequacy, development is hindered rather than harnessed. Public reaction to visible confidence often depends on who expresses it. In some players, it's praised as leadership. In others, the same behavior is portrayed as divisive. Bellingham now faces that imbalance. The question isn't whether he believes in himself, it's whether that belief aligns with what traditional commentators think an English international should look like. Unspoken criteria shape perception, delivery, background, age, and how quickly a player assumes responsibility. Older leaders are seen as composed, while younger ones are framed as forceful. Quiet conviction is admired. Vocal ambition is criticized, even when supported by performances. These standards shift depending on the individual and fuel unfair character narratives. History proves the greatest players often showed edge. Globally, that mentality is respected. In English coverage, it's frequently dissected. When expectations favor restraint, assertiveness, no matter how controlled, conflicts with public comfort. The result isn't analysis, but soft character attacks. It's unrealistic to ignore that some personalities face harsher judgment. High visibility attracts intensified monitoring, and traits celebrated in others get reframed as destabilizing when dissected by players like Bellingham. This pattern becomes more pronounced ahead of major tournaments, where blame is informally allocated in advance. If England falls short, impact players are positioned to absorb fallout. Expecting leadership while rejecting the mentality behind it is contradictory. If competitive edge is rebranded as instability, the qualities needed in defining moments, they may be suppressed before they can influence outcomes. Jude Bellingham stands at a point faced by many of England's most gifted players before him. His impact on the pitch is undeniable, and his mentality drives him to demand the highest level of performance. The scrutiny surrounding his personality will likely continue, not because it reflects weakness, but because it offers an accessible narrative for those unwilling to critique structural flaws. How he chooses to respond may shape his long-term relationship with the national discourse, but ultimately, results delivered at critical stages remain the most effective answer. Silencing expression won't protect him. Dulling confidence won't satisfy critics. Historically, those who adapted themselves to please external commentary often faded, while those who embraced their identity and channeled intensity into consistent excellence became remembered for contribution rather than controversy. If Bellingham continues performing as he has while maturing naturally through experience, opinion will eventually realign. Once the public witnesses pivotal impact repeatedly, scrutiny usually gives way to reluctant respect. England's football culture has a choice. It can support talent early, allowing them to develop with reassurance and focused improvement, or it can repeat familiar patterns where expectation becomes a tool for deflection when outcomes disappoint. If the latter persists, future generations will arrive with the same barriers. The strongest personalities won't be removed by criticism, they'll be dulled by hesitation. That costs more than it protects, especially when tournaments demand decisiveness. Bellingham's best path forward is not retreat, but clarity in his ambition and responsibility. Teams win trophies when their internal leaders act with conviction. National programs progress when they value character as much as capability. If passion is treated as acceptable at club level, but criticized when worn on international duty, then inconsistency lies not with the player, but with the environment judging him. If his self-belief continues to align with tangible impact, the attempts to undermine his presence will gradually lose strength. Eventually, performance forces recalibration, and in that moment, the same voices criticizing edge will praise resilience. The cycle will always exist, but how players confront it define whether they are consumed by it or surpass it. For someone with both the talent and the mentality to influence the highest level, the response is simple: sustain the standard, build legacy, and let the game validate what conversation tries to dismantle.